Just enjoy and listen to, and have a fun of it.
Welcome to your deep dive here on Story Radio Station.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
Before we jump into today's really fascinating topic, could you just take a quick second to subscribe, like, and maybe turn on notifications?
Yeah, it really helps us keep bringing these kinds of deep dives to you.
Okay, so today we're cutting through some of the noise around, well, one of the biggest global events coming up. The 30th session of the UN Climate Change Conference.
Yeah.
COP30.
Mm-hmm.
But look, this isn't just about hitting emissions targets, is it?
No, not at all. This conference, it's shaping up to be maybe the most critical arena yet for this decades-old conflict, between the global North developed nations and the global South, the developing ones.
Right.
And the core tension, it's all about historical responsibility. Who actually caused the environmental damage and, well, who's really paying the price now?
That structural unfairness, that injustice. That's why this is such a compelling topic for us to dig into. So we're going to spend the next few minutes trying to unpack the complex history behind it all, the main sticking points in the diplomacy, and crucially the money, the financial battles that could make or break COP30.
Yeah, the finance part is key.
Okay, let's start with the setting, the strategy behind it. COP30 is happening November 2025 in Belém, Brazil. Now, why is this location a city right on the Amazon River? Why is that so important? It's not just a random venue, right?
Oh, absolutely not random. What's really fascinating here is that Belém, it's not just geography, it's a political statement.
How so?
Well, by hosting it deep within the Amazon basin, Brazil is immediately, leveraging its position. They're trying to steer the global conversation.
Steer it towards what?
Their goal seems to be shifting the focus away from just fossil fuels, which, let's be honest, they still rely on, and towards things like protecting tropical ecosystems, the push for zero deforestation, and critically upholding the rights of indigenous peoples who live there.
So it reframes the whole debate. Less about industrial pollution, more about biodiversity and social justice.
Exactly. That's the move. And Brazil is promoting this concept. It's based on an indigenous term, global mutirão.
Mutirão. What does that mean?
It means something like collective cooperation. Sounds positive.
Yeah, I think that.
But it's a clear diplomatic tactic. By centering the discussion on protecting the Amazon, they ramp up the ethical pressure on developed nations. Pressure to provide substantial official financial aid, not just loans, mind you, for ecological preservation and helping communities adapt.
Okay, so this underlying conflict, this demand for help versus the responsibility for causing the damage, it all goes back to that core principle that's governed climate talks for ages, right? CBDR.
That's it. Common but differentiated responsibilities. CBDR, that's where the philosophical battle really begins.
So CBDR acknowledges that, okay, all countries need to protect the climate, but they have different levels of responsibility based on how much they contributed to the problem historically.
Precisely. But how that principle has been applied, that's evolved. And understanding that evolution is absolutely key to grasping the fights we're seeing now heading into COP30.
Right. Can you walk us through that? How did it change from the early days?
Sure. So back in the Kyoto Protocol era, that was 1997, CBDR was applied very strictly. It was very much a top-down system.
Top-down meaning?
Meaning only the developed nations, the Annex I countries, the ones that industrialized first, only they got mandatory, legally binding targets to cut emissions, the global South. Basically no obligations back then.
Which historically kind of makes sense. The biggest polluters should do the most, right?
It made sense then, yeah.
Yeah.
But fast forward to the Paris Agreement in 2015. The world looked different. Emissions were rising fastest in some big developing economies like China and India.
Okay.
So the system had to change. It switched to universal participation, more of a bottom-up approach. Now, every country submits its own target, the NDC, the nationally determined contribution.
And the principle itself changed too.
It evolved, yeah.
Right.
Into CBDRRC. The RC stands for respective capabilities. It acknowledges different national circumstances.
So developing nations now have to participate in cutting emissions.
Yeah.
But there's a big if attached. It's not just you must cut. It's more like we will cut if you, the developed world, provide the money and the technology.
That is the absolute critical pivot. Think of it like this. CBDRRC is like asking everyone in an apartment building to cut their energy use.
Okay.
the wealthy person in the penthouse. They're asked to make huge cuts, install solar panels, the works. The renter in the tiny studio already using hardly any energy, they're also asked to participate.
Right.
But they first need the landlord, the global north in this analogy, to pay for basic upgrades, like fix the leaky windows before they can even think about bigger cuts. That's the respective capabilities part.
That's a great analogy. It really highlights the difference in ability to act and connecting this inequality back. The Global South isn't just asking for aid, are they? They're framing it as debt repayment.
Exactly. They argue the North has already used up most of the world's carbon budget. So they've incurred an ecological debt.
And that debt, it's not just theoretical.
No, it's shockingly tangible. There is an Oxfam report just before COP30 that laid this bare. It found, get this, the carbon emissions from just one day for a single person in the world's top 0.1%.
One day.
Exceeds the entire annual emissions budget for someone in the bottom 50% of the world's population.
Wow. A single day versus a whole year. That statistic.
Yeah.
It just fundamentally shifts how you have to think about responsibility, isn't it?
It really does.
When the carbon budget is consumed that disproportionately, finance stops being charity and starts being about, well, paying back a debt, addressing a massive structural failure.
It forces us to see that the climate crisis is a crisis of economic inequality. They're inseparable. And that same report pointed out something else.
What's that?
60%. 60 of the investment portfolios of these super rich individuals are tied up in high carbon stuff. Oil, mining, you name it. The emissions just from those investments, they surpass the total national emissions of 118 entire countries combined.
Unbelievable. So the fight at COP30, it really is about the whole economic architecture, isn't it? Not just greenhouse gases.
Absolutely. It elevates climate finance from, a question of should we help to a mandate for how do we achieve justice.
Right, okay. That really sets the stage. That wraps up part one. We've looked at the strategic backdrop of Belém, the history of this CBDR conflict, and how it boils down to climate justice. We're going to take a very quick 10-second pause. When we come back in part two, we'll dive straight into the heart of the conflict.
Good evening, and welcome to the Story radio station, where we explore tales from around the world.
The money, the loss and damage fund, and this new collective quantified goal. Stay with us. 10-second pause.
Okay, welcome back. So in part one, we really established that climate justice is central. Now let's shift from that historical debt to the actual financial nuts and bolts that COP30 has to sort out.
Right. And the first huge financial battleground is the loss and damage fund. The L&D fund, this was agreed at COP28, wasn't it? To help vulnerable countries dealing with climate impacts they just can't adapt to anymore.
That's right, irreversible impacts. Think islands disappearing under rising seas. The proposed size is enormous, a target of $125 billion total.
$125 billion. How does that break down?
The aim is about $25 billion from public sources, governments, and leveraging a much larger $100 billion in private investment.
Okay, so the fund exists, the target's there. What's the problem?
The problem isn't the idea of the fund, it's the governance. Who controls the money? The World Bank has been named the interim host.
And developing nations don't like that.
They are extremely critical, yes.
Yeah.
They see it as a move by the global north to basically keep control of the purse strings, using an institution that historically has been dominated by Western interests and priorities.
But hang on, doesn't an institution like the World Bank have the plumbing to handle that kind of money? Are developing countries asking for some brand new, untested system instead?
Well, that's the tricky trade-off, isn't it? The World Bank brings scale, yes, but developing nations are really worried. They fear the funding will come with strict conditions, maybe even lead to debt traps, piling onto the debt they already carry.
Ah, okay. So what are they demanding instead?
They want transparency, first off, and they want accessible, direct support. Ways to get the money that respect their fiscal sovereignty, that don't bury them in more debt. They're pushing back hard against models favored by the US and Japan, this kind of private-public contribution idea.
What they want is?
They want clear, public, obligatory funding from developed countries, not relying on private finance that might not show up or comes with too many strings attached.
Got it. Okay. That L&D fund fight sounds intense. What's the second big money battle?
That's the NCQG. The new Collective Quantified Goal. COP30 must finalize this. It's the replacement for that old $100 billion a year target from developed nations, which officially expired back in 2020.
Right, the $100 billion that was famously never fully met anyway. So everyone agrees the NCQG has to be way bigger than $100 billion. But what else are developing countries asking for? Just a larger number.
No, it's much more fundamental than just the amount. The demand is systemic. NCQG isn't only about the total dollars, it's about radically reshaping all financial flows.
Reshaping how?
The Global South is pushing for specific rules, actual regulations, to make sure that all money flowing around the world, private investment included, aligns with a low-emission future.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is. And it means developed nations would have to take on a much bigger share of the risk, provide more guarantees. It goes way beyond the kind of vague promises we've seen before.
And this level of systemic change, it connects directly back to climate action itself, right? Like how much developing countries commit to cutting their own emissions for 2035?
Absolutely. There's an ironclad link here. For developing nations, securing finance for adaptation is basically the prerequisite for them raising their mitigation ambition.
Adaptation finance, meaning money to cope with the climate impacts happening right now.
Exactly. And the key battleground within that is finalizing the indicators for the global goal on adaptation, the GGA.
Indicators. That sounds bureaucratic.
Yeah.
Why are indicators so crucial?
They might sound technical, but they are anything but mere technicalities. Think about it. If you can't even measure whether you're successfully adapting, protecting your coastlines, securing water, strengthening buildings, how can a developing country justify pouring scarce resources into long-term, maybe politically difficult mitigation goals like phasing down coal? They need that basic security first.
So no progress on measuring adaptation,
Yeah.
no money for adaptation.
Then the Global South simply won't, or maybe can't, raise their own emission reduction targets. That structural link is incredibly strong going into COP30.
Which sets up that final, really thorny conflict point, the future of energy itself, fossil fuels. The Global North often pushes hard for a quick phase-out.
And the Global South pushes back just as hard. For them, the priority is energy security and what they call a just transition.
Just transition.
Yeah.
What does that entail, practically?
It means they argue that a sudden phase-out imposed from outside without support. That could trigger massive unemployment, poverty, economic chaos in countries that still rely heavily on coal or oil.
So a just transition means the North has to basically bankroll the South's shift, help restructure energy grids, retrain workers, compensate for lost jobs and revenue. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the demand. They will resist any agreement text that doesn't spell out in detail both the speed of the transition and the guaranteed financial and tech support needed to make it happen without wrecking their economies.
So if the money isn't explicitly promised and secured?
Then phase out remains just a word and a major source of division.
Okay, so looking at all these potential flashpoints, if COP30 fails, if they can't bridge these gaps on finance and justice, what's the big risk? What happens next?
The biggest risk, honestly, is a catastrophic weakening of multilateralism itself, of countries working together.
Replaced by what?
Replaced by energy protectionism, climate action turning into trade wars.
How does that work?
Well, when developed nations feel the global negotiations are too slow or aren't delivering, they start acting alone. Think of the EU's target 90% reduction by 2040. That's ambitious.
Okay, but how does that become a trade dispute?
Through mechanisms like CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism.
Right, CBAM. Explain that simply.
Essentially, it's a tax on imported goods coming from countries that don't have similar carbon pricing policies at home.
So developing countries see this as
a hostile trade barrier. It forces them to pay a carbon price at the border, effectively punishing them for having different national circumstances, lower capabilities. It's basically unilateral climate policy disguised as a tariff. It bypasses the whole CBDRRC principle.
So when you really boil it down, the true measure of success for COP30 isn't necessarily hitting some perfect target for phasing out fossil fuels immediately.
Probably not, no.
It's much more about whether the developed nations actually step up, whether they demonstrate the will to genuinely meet their financial responsibilities linked to that historical debt and actually deliver climate justice.
That really is the takeaway. This conference feels like an inflection point. The whole climate response paradigm has to shift from just talking about sharing responsibility to actually realizing justice for the damage already done.
Because without that,
without securing the ability of developing nations to adapt through real, committed finance that doesn't create more debt, the global push to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, it's just going to hit a wall. Political gridlock, financial gridlock, failure.
So we want to leave you, our listeners, with this final thought to chew on. Can COP30 actually manage this shift? Can it elevate global leadership beyond just banging the drum for mitigation ambition and push it firmly into this new, necessary dimension of justice realization for the harm already inflicted?
Watching how those financial negotiations play out, that will tell us everything.
Absolutely crucial.
We really hope our deep dive today has helped you navigate the complexities and understand what's truly at stake in this incredibly important global moment.
Yeah, and if you found our story useful, please do subscribe, like us, turn on those notifications. It helps keep the lights on here at the Story Archive.
It does indeed.
This has been Story Radio Station. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next time.